Back in 1994, the Democrat Jay Inslee was a freshman U.S. congressman representing a central eastern district of Washington state when he voted for a federal assault weapons ban. He later said the vote cost him his seat. And indeed, Inslee lost his bid for re-election as the 1994 Republican Revolution swept a wave of conservatives into office. Nearly 30 years later, Inslee is now the Democratic governor of Washington, and while the national assault weapons ban has expired, his state is forging its own gun regulations. The state Senate just approved a bill that would ban assault weapons in Washington. It now returns to the state House for final approval, and if it passes, it heads to Governor Inslee's desk for his signature. Joining me now is the governor, Jay Inslee, the Democratic governor of Washington state. Governor Inslee, good to see you. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
Your state, this ban has been introduced in Washington state for a few years now. It's never passed until now. What's changed?
Well, people have had a belly full of violence, gun violence. They understand there is no reason on this green earth why we need weapons of war in our streets, and they've seen their children being exposed to violence in their schools. And now this is a vast, vast majority of Washingtonians and Americans who want to take these weapons of war off our streets. So I will be signing a bill in the next couple of weeks to ban assault weapons. And since 1994, it's been a long road, but thank goodness we're getting there. But this is not the only thing we need to do. We're also, I'm confident we'll be passing a bill this year to require a safety training course for people before they buy a firearm and have a 10-day waiting period, which will join our other laws we passed in the last year or two, requiring gun owners to safely store their firearms. We need to do several things, not just one thing. But the time has come for action. Inaction is not an excuse. We may not solve all the problems, but we can take major steps. And I'm glad I'll be taking a significant step in the next couple of weeks.
Well, look, what you say makes sense, that people are fed up. They are prepared to see common sense regulations on guns that do not mean the elimination of the Second Amendment. And you're moving in lockstep with where the population is. There are a whole lot of states moving in the other direction. And I don't know whether it's the protection racket that is the NRA that warns people that no matter whether there was a mass shooting in your town or a school shooting, do not suggest anything. Otherwise, you'll lose your protection. Why are there states, particularly in the Southeast, going in entirely the opposite direction than your country is, your state is?
Well, it has been my experience frequently that politicians have been listening to the NRA rather than their constituents. In 1994, even when I was removed from office, in the state of Washington, there was a majority in favor of this. But the NRA has some political clout. And you have some folks who vote just on one issue, and therefore democracy doesn't work always, and that the public will is not followed. But in this case, I am confident that the public will is they don't want AR-15s intruding on their children's schools. And we need to continue to press this. And maybe we won't succeed in every single state, in every single month. But every state that follows my state in following democracy and addressing common sense gun measures, we will keep this ball rolling, just like we are doing and protecting a woman's right of choice, just like we're doing and moving against climate change. These are the majority opinions of vast majorities of Americans. And sometimes you have to make progress state by state, not necessarily in the congressional field. And the more states that do this, the more it moves the needle, both politically and culturally. And I'm convinced that the momentum is now to give our children some measure of safety. And that means passing these common sense measures.
You talked about protecting a woman's rights to choose. You've been in the midst of a few major stories in the last few days. You have stockpiled medication abortion, the pill mifepristone, which might be banned nationwide in a matter of days. Tell me what your thought process is behind that and what that actually means. If the medication is banned for distribution, will people be able to get the mifepristone that you've stockpiled?
Yes, in our state, because our state had the foresight to stockpile 3 or 4 years of the supply of mifepristone, we took possession of that. It was safely in our hands before the judge in Texas, the Trump appointee, issued their ruling. And because of that, we now will be free to continue to dispense this to women in Washington state, even if the Texas judge's decision was affirmed by this Supreme Court. So I can pretty much say with confidence, we will be able to continue to dispense this product. We also, as you know, had one federal judge in Washington State actually rule the opposite because of our great work of our Attorney General Bob Ferguson. So we don't know what the Supreme Court is going to do, but we do know that Washington women are going to have access to the mifepristone. I'm glad other states are now joining us in this regard. And I think this is kind of one of the measures as an eye-opener. We are going to have to be creative and aggressive on a state-by-state basis, because those people who would want to suppress this right in women are going to come after us state by state. In Idaho, my adjoining state, they're trying to ban the right to cross state lines to exercise the right of choice. And I think this is just an opening salvo, and we need to be aggressive and creative. I'm glad we have. It's going to work, and I hope other states join us.
Let me ask you about Idaho. You actually wrote a letter to the governor of Idaho condemning that state's bill that makes it a crime to help a minor get an abortion out of state. In the letter, you wrote, "We welcome Idaho's patients and health care providers with open arms in Washington." Abortion's banned in Idaho with very rare exceptions. In your state, minors can get an abortion without parental consent. Tell me how this all plays out for you. Do you actually imagine that you're going to see Idahoan fugitives coming into Washington? Because we've seen what happens in Ohio when a minor can't get an abortion. It's draconian.
Look, there's a really simple principle here. Idaho can make the laws for their state, but they're not going to make the laws for Washington State. Women has a right of choice under laws that are determined by our legislature and our people. And those laws apply to activities within the state of Washington. And we are not going to allow Idaho politicians dictate to the citizens of Washington what happens in the state of Washington. This bill attempts to regulate what happens in Washington State. The Idaho legislature does not have jurisdiction in my state, in our state. And therefore, they will not be allowed to dictate who can travel to and from Idaho. By the way, they attempt to apply this to Washington citizens, too. They try to say Washington citizens who happen to travel in Idaho essentially can't travel back in some sense. So we are going to resist this. I assume there's going to be litigation in some sense. We're going to have to figure out whether we can be a party or just Planned Parenthood. But one way or another, we cannot allow one state to cut off the right of travel in the United States. This is a constitutional right to travel across state lines. And what is legal in Washington will remain legal in Washington State. That's a very important constitutional principle.
I got a couple of minutes left, and I don't want to start a fight between fantastic Canadian border states, but last night I had Governor Whitmer on the show, and she said that if people want to live in a state that respects the rights that they've come to expect, they should move to Michigan. You seem to be doing something like that in Washington. You're creating a safe haven for people who care about gun safety, people who care about abortion, people who care about living their best free lives, something that libertarians and conservatives used to pride red states for being.
Well, I don't get up in the morning trying to create a sanctuary, but we do care about other people. Look, when Idaho and their politicians did not act responsibly during the COVID epidemic, they did not take measures that could have saved people's lives. As a consequence, they had scores of people get sick, and they came over to Washington, and we gave them health care. We treated them. They're Americans. We care about them and their lives. We care about everybody. And we care about the right of choice for all women. So women are welcome in our state, and we will have the means to provide them the right of choice in our state, and that will continue. And these are basically fundamental freedom issues. We ought to have freedom for a woman's right of choice. We ought to have freedom for kids to go to school and not be assaulted by a weapon of war. There ought to be a freedom to breathe and not be consumed by forest fire smoke because of climate change. So I would say that we are a state that believes in freedom, and others are welcome to come and enjoy it. I think Gretchen Whitmer is a tremendous governor. She's got a beautiful state, and she can come visit us too. So I'm glad to be in the party that stands up for freedom.
Well played.
Right now in this clash.
Well played, Governor. And all of you can go to Canada real easily, so that's good, too. Nice to see you, Governor, as always.